Welcome to Fun with Annuities with your host, me, Stan the Annuity Man, America's annuity agent. Can annuities be fun? Can contractual guarantees be fun? Absolutely they can. Find out the brutal facts about annuities with no sales pitches or high-pressure nonsense. Just the brutal and factual annuity truth, which is all you need to hear. Let's have some fun with annuities, and let's have that fun start right now. Welcome to Fun with Annuities. I'm your host, Stan the Annuity Man, America's annuity agent. I want to welcome every single person out there that's listening to us on all major podcast platforms and watching us on the Fun with Annuities YouTube channel. You can go there and see all of the recorded replays of my celebrity guests when we have them on. Boy, do we have a celebrity, easy for me to say. Today, her name is Heather Schreiber. And she is just a nationally renowned Social Security expert. There's a lot more to it than that. She does a lot more than that. But what we're going to talk about today, because the people listening to this are primarily individual investors and people that are trying to learn, even though there are some, Heather, a bunch of advisors do. They don't tell anybody, but they follow us because this is one of the fastest growing financial podcasts in the country. So with that being said, Heather, welcome to Fun with Annuities. Thanks so much for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me, Stan. This will be fun. Looking forward to it.
This should be fun. Well, tell us a little bit. I always want my celebrity guests to tell people kind of who they are. I know you're from Georgia, which that makes you a wonderful person because you're from the South, like I am originally from North Carolina. So I might start twanging here. So if we start twanging, that's good because we Southerners mirror themselves. But tell us a little bit about yourself and how you became this renowned expert in the space of Social Security.
Well, I have been in the same industry from out of the womb, I feel like. I'm going to date myself. I graduated from college in 1992, and in 1993 landed my first job in the retirement division of Franklin Templeton Mutual Funds.
There you go.
And I just sort of cleaved onto every ounce of knowledge I could get. I mean, I was on the call center talking to consumers that are listening to this, what's my balance? How do I do an IRA? All of those things. And I just, from a very early age, I was all of ripe of 22 years old, said, this is what I want to do. And so I stayed. This is my 28th, I think, if I can do my math right, 28th year in the industry. And I primarily focus on helping those who help the consumers. I do get the good fortune of being able to talk to consumers when, usually on behalf of someone that's helping them, whether it's their CPA, their attorney, their financial planner. But I just made it my mission to be a consumer advocate. I love educating people, and there isn't enough of that. People are Googling, and that, you and I both know that can be a holy nightmare. So I focused on retirement income planning. That's kind of my sweet spot. And then, 12, 15 years ago, I realized that Social Security was an area that many financial practitioners shied away from because it was complex. And there was a lot of need for consumers to have advocates in their corner because, there's so much that goes into it. For roughly 90% of us in retirement, we're relying on Social Security in some form or fashion. And for a lot of us, that is the pension of our retirement, right? And so I always say you have to look at Social Security like that. For those of us that are fortunate enough to have a pension still, and we know that those are going away in lieu of 401ks for most of the responsibilities on us for our retirement. But you get that statement if you're a pension recipient that says, okay, here's your choices. You finally made it. And so what are the choices? What option are you going to take? Are you going to take just for your single life? Are you going to take a qualifying joint annuity and benefit a surviving spouse? I look at Social Security exactly the same way. It has to be something that a very careful consideration is done in terms of when to claim. And I always say to people, I used to run into people, tax professionals, some financial professionals would say, oh, everyone should file at X. And I would say you're doing them a grave disservice, because we're not all created equal, right? We all have different goals in retirement. We have different challenges in retirement. We might have more saved than another. So all of that is going to play into how that decision should go. And so that became a mission of mine, to educate everyone that I could touch, what needs to go into this decision. It isn't just, I retire, therefore I claim. It isn't, oh, I'm afraid it's not going to be there, so everyone should turn it on at 62. It really is, knowing what you know before you walk into that Social Security office, which they're finally reopening. And what I'll tell people, and you've probably heard this in all of your talks with folks, is that Social Security, the representatives there are not permitted to engage in anything that looks as though they're giving advice. And so that consumers have to go in there equipped with the knowledge they need to make a claiming decision that works for them and makes sense for them in their situation. So that's the abridged version of how I sort of made this my mission. So yeah, Social Security is one of the topics that I specialize in. It's one, honestly, that I get the most reach out for. I mean, even from consumers, read something that I've, been quoted or whatever. So I just love education, and so do you. So that's why this is a great thing.
No, absolutely. You also know your way around Medicare as well. So in combination with Social Security, Medicare planning, which are, I always tell people Social Security is the best inflation annuity on the planet. I love it when people tell me I hate all annuities. I'm like, well, I guess you need to go buy Social Security and turn off that income stream.
Right.
That's a lifetime income stream. Couple fallacies and things that I always hear from people, the baby boomers, the 10,000 that are reaching age 65 every day, more than that, I think now. Mm-hmm. Hey, Stan, and now it's, hey, Heather, is Social Security going to be around? Tell us about that. How do you answer that question when people ask it?
And valid. I mean, they've been bombarded, the media, constantly, if it leads, it bleeds. I wrote a recent article for my newsletter about that, right? That, it's going defunct, it's insolvent. And you have to understand what insolvency means, because it doesn't mean that there's nothing, that once it's insolvent, it's done. So, the history of the trust funds, the message has been every year in around October-ish, we get the status of the trust funds, right? Well, in 2020, the trust fund report came out, and we eagerly, us nerds that read into this stuff said, okay, what did this do this year? Well, what was interesting, it really wasn't very different from the years before. That, somewhere 2034, 2035, we're looking at insolvency. Insolvency just means that the trust funds are depleted. It does not mean that they're just going to cut off benefits. Okay, so that means that the expenses are greater than the ongoing revenue. And the revenue comes obviously from payroll taxes. It comes from the interest income on the U.S. Treasury securities. And it comes from the taxation of benefits for those that are taxed on their benefits. But anyway, interestingly, they said, hey, P.S. on the 2020 report, this doesn't take into consideration any effects of the pandemic. So of course, if it leads, it bleeds. Everyone was like, oh my gosh, it doesn't. And so COVID is this thing's going to become insolvent next year. I mean, it was, there was a lot of that. Well, then the 2021 report came out, and it wasn't nearly as dire as what some media outlets have projected, which is hopeful, right? Mm-hmm. And so it basically said that we're still along the same path. We still have issues, that if nothing changes between now and then, that in 2034, the combined trust funds, meaning the OASDI, so the combined Social Security and Disability trust funds, will be depleted in 2034. That's when they'll become insolvent. And then again, if nothing changes, then they'll have enough in ongoing revenue to pay 78% of benefits. So where does that leave us? Well, it leaves us with the same message that they've been saying for years, which is at the very end of that report, they always say changes need to happen sooner rather than later so that we don't have this issue. So I always say, yes, you're going to have consumers that are concerned, understandably so. What is going to happen? Listen, this thing isn't going to go defunct. That would be political suicide, right? So I think it's going to correct itself. Now, how is anyone's guess? I think, cutting benefits, I hope that that isn't the case, or I could see possibly delaying the full retirement age for people that are younger. The latest full retirement age right now is 67 for people born in 1960 or later. Could I see that going up? Sure. People are living longer. I could see that. But is that going to fix it in the short term? Probably not. I tend to think that perhaps we're going to look at higher payroll taxes to bring a stream of income in. And so those are the things. But it begs the question, then, how do we plan in an uncertain environment? That's why you need to work with somebody and a team of people that helps you navigate, okay, the what ifs. How are we going to bridge income if there is, God forbid, they say, okay, we're going to cut 22% of your benefits starting in 2034. I don't think that's going to happen. But nevertheless, that's why pre-planning is so incredibly important to think about the what ifs. I don't even know if I answered your question. I get off on tangents.
No, you did. I have a question that hits a lot of times when I'm talking to people about the possibility of what's called means testing. It's in essence saying, hey, we, the government, think that you're rich, even though you don't think you're rich, and you are the evil rich. And because you've worked hard and scrimped and saved and all that stuff, we might have a system in place in the future to opt you out. I hear that a lot with a lot of my high net worth clients, and people are out there going, well, they're high net worth, why should they care? My opinion with that is, I was speaking with someone yesterday that had just sold their business, had worked so hard. And now I said, hey, by the way, you're millionaires now, so congratulations. And they could not grasp that. Getting back to the question, do you see means testing going down the pike? Because that's an easy sell for politicians.
It's possible. It would go against everything that the system has always been in place for. It's not one of the systems that's means tested. So it's interesting. It's anyone's guess. I don't know. I mean, I've heard it. I hope that isn't the case, but who knows? Who knows?
That's my pessimistic, realistic view on life is that, everything to me, from DC standpoint, they're looking at voting blocks.
Yeah.
And it's easy to point to people that have accumulated assets because they represent such a small portion.
Right. And that has been the target, right, of proposals. And really it's not, high net worth, how you define it. I mean, right now the proposals are hitting people with, the taxable income of $400,000 or more. That's kind of the sweet spot. That's been the target for all the tax proposals that are out there. So who knows? I don't know.
What mistakes, what are some of the primary mistakes you see people making when looking at Social Security and making those claiming decisions? What are some glaring ones that you just kind of slap your forehead when you hear about them? Or that advisors, and one of the things Heather does very well out there is she tries to take advisors and make them a little bit smarter in all this, which is kind of like showing paintings to blind people. Heather, when you're talking to some advisors. But what are some of the mistakes, I guess, individuals make? And I guess that would dovetail into what advisors are telling people as well.
As far as consumers, what I would caution is, particularly for married couples, because what does everyone start with? Consumer says, well, what's my break even? How long do I have to live or to make sense for me to hold out? I know that everything I'm reading says you really should wait. To at least full retirement age, anyone who doesn't know, full retirement age is, quote, the magic age, right? Because a whole host of things happens. You get 100%, at least for now, 100% of your primary insurance amount, the amount that's based on your highest 35 years of indexed earnings. There's no reductions. You don't have to worry about how much you earn and having that be a potential issue. But people, obviously say, gosh, I know I can take it at 62. Why shouldn't I? What's my break even? And I would say, you have to be careful about the break even thing when you're married. And the reason is because, oftentimes, and I still see quite a bit, I'm starting to see obviously dual income households where they're more equal in their benefit estimates, but we're still seeing a disparity, a wide disparity. And that's the demographic is changing of the working family, right? And so I'll use myself as an example. I took a hiatus. I was still sort of consulting on the side, but I took a hiatus for about 6 years where I was like, okay, I'm going to raise these boys of mine.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have a break. And so I see that a lot, where there's one parent that stays in the house. And so you might see a disparity in income benefits. And when you see that, having that discussion about when to claim is really important to look at the couple, because if the higher wage earner says, well, I'm not that healthy, I'm going to go ahead and file at 62 because no one in my family lived past 80 or 75 or whatever the case may be. Well, they're not thinking, and it's not that they're selfishly not thinking about it. They're just not thinking and taking that out to what happens down the road. So if we take that out and say, okay, if you're a $3,000 primary insurance amounter and you have a spouse that's $1,000, let's just say, or $1,500 or whatever, and that higher wage earner is the one who thinks that they're not going to live long enough for it to make mathematical sense to wait, then let's play that out. That person then dies at even 75. What happens? Well, that survivor, that $1,000 person, is now left with the reduced age 62 benefit, right, of their spouse, because that's the higher of the two. So when one spouse dies, the first thing you need to know is that one of those benefits is going away, and it's a smaller one, right? Mm-hmm. So when you're dealing with that disparity, you have to really play that out and say, okay, if I've got the higher benefit amount, I need to be considering my claiming age for when I'm past too, because most spouses say, yes, I am concerned about what happens to my surviving spouse's income. And so that's one of the things I see is, so I would say my takeaway there is, what is a mistake that consumers make? Relying too heavily on that break even, especially if they're married. So that would be what I'd say there. With advisors, I would say having a rule of thumb, everyone should file at 62, everyone should do this, everyone should do that. And I tell people, run, don't walk, run away from that, because you're not everyone, right? You have specific things, and I need to get to know you. I need to understand what makes you tick. What is it that you're, maybe what's your, what drives you? Is it legacy? Are you concerned about leaving assets to kids? Are you concerned about having to take care of a loved one? What other assets do you have saved for retirement? What's your income need? When do you plan to retire? All of those things come into play. And so I think that anyone who says, well, this should just be a rule of thumb, I never say that. And nor do I ever say, mathematically, if someone lives to average life expectancy these days, which for a man, a 65-year-old man, it's like 84, for a female, it's 87. Mm-hmm. Everyone should file at 70. That's mathematically, because if you only have to live from a break-even standpoint, you only have to live to about 81 for it to make more sense to file at 70 versus 62. And that's 8 years of lost income. So mathematically, it does make more sense, but you're still never going to find me saying everyone should file at 70, because I want to know you. I want to understand you. I want to understand what is of concern to you, and work the situation so that we're taking into consideration everything. Lifetime income for both of you if you're married, survivor income, the person that has a pension, what happens to that pension if they're lucky enough to have one? Is it a joint survivor pension or is it single? And if it's a survivor pension, at what percentage? So all of that comes into play, and we don't even talk about taxes, right? So you have to really develop a plan that makes sense for the person.
I agree. You just hit your mic. I don't know if you hit that, but that's what everyone heard on the podcast. I think you said that so well, which is everything's customizable. I always tell people that if your advisor says, I hate all annuities, take your Social Security at 66, and this is how you do Medicare, whatever, it's like Heather said, run, get up, and just leave, because everything in the financial world is customizable. And especially with Social Security, I think one of the biggest mistakes being made in Social Security advising that I hear, and I don't do Social Security advising. I want people to listen to people like you, and people that do that for their living, and they're specialists in that. But I think one of the big things is people's current health status, their longevity within their family, how they're actually feeling. I had a gentleman the other day say, well, I'm 61, but I just had a stent put in my heart at age 60. My dad died at age 66. That's a person that might want to turn it on sooner than later. And it's not, that doesn't mean it's a bad decision. But if you go on the internet, it's like, never turn it on at 62, right? I mean, a lot of it also comes down to, do you really need the income? And a vast majority of Americans, this is their primary source of lifetime income, which is also sad. When you talk to advisors, do you see them making that mistake of not thinking about the health status or making those deductions?
I think that, I would like to think that's sort of, I mean, if we all had a crystal ball, we would all know exactly when to file. So I think that is sort of step one in my mind. It's like, well, exactly, right? That is part of the equation. Again, when you're talking with a couple, that is, but you also have to think of, again, the longevity of the couple when you're making that decision. So yeah, definitely. And I again, there are going to be people, the average age is actually going up. So, it used to be that the majority did file at 62. It's actually gone up for both male and females to about 64 in some months. So this is a positive trend because
Why is that?
I think that I'm hopeful. Well, few things. I'm hoping that people are getting more education about the longevity. It really is the annuity for most people, right? It is the annuity. And so I think some of it's education. It could be people are working longer. And so, if anyone has ever, tried to file for benefits before their full retirement age, and they're working, then sometimes I would be turned away entirely from Social Security because you can only make a certain modest amount of income and collect a benefit without it starting to impact how much you can collect. So, I hope, my ideal for most people, would not be 62 simply because of mathematics. If, like 78 is about the break even there for 62 versus waiting until full retirement age. And most people, as we said, are living longer and whatever. But for sure, I would hope that is one of the first questions is, tell me about your family history and all of that. Yeah, for sure.
Are these inflation numbers making you gasp for air?
You mean for Social Security?
Yes. Is this just uncharted waters at this point?
Yeah. And and again, that's something that advisors should be talking to people about too. We got to plan, for this. It's crazy. Look at healthcare inflation. The percentages are staggering of how much of Social Security income people are having to spend on long-term care expenses in retirement. So it's something that definitely needs to be part of the conversation, planning for that, for sure.
And at the time of this taping, obviously the Social Security payments were increased due to the formula for inflation. It looks like the following year will have a similar increase. But unfortunately, I believe that's being wiped out by current gas prices and current food prices.
Right.
It's almost like we're treading water again.
Right.
That retiree that is primarily dependent upon Social Security as their lifetime income stream, they're not getting ahead. What are you hearing with the experts that you interact with in the Social Security space? What are they talking about? What are the new strategies that you and your cohorts are developing? With all this the demographic tidal wave that's happening right now, people are thirsty for this type of advice, which is the reason I wanted to have you on, because just your cadence and approach is very easy to understand and simplistic, which is good. So is there anything that people need to be aware of, or they just need to know the basics?
Well, inflation certainly is hitting everybody hard right now, and certainly retirees. One of the proposals that has been out there for a while, and quite frankly, I hope goes through, is changing the consumer price index that measures, right, that inflation. So, it currently is the consumer price index for urban and clerical workers, and I'm like, well, but we're not, but retirees aren't those people, right? That's not measuring the spending habits of the very people that are relying on this income source.
Typical government approach, right?
So, there have been several proposals to change that to the consumer price index for the elderly. So because what do we change? Our spending habits. I mean, in retirement, what's one of our biggest spends in retirement? Healthcare.
Mm-hmm.
And so, they need to shift that to something that measures what that demographic is actually spending on. And if they do that, that would increase, in all likelihood, would increase the cost of living adjustment to be more in line with what they're spending on. I mean, it's an issue. I mean, certainly my heart goes out to people that are in retirement right now, trying to make ends meet with exactly what you said. I mean, everybody's probably becoming vegetarians because, I mean, steak prices are,
We got an influx of veganism all of a sudden, forced veganism.
Rice and beans, that's what I sustained on in college. I'm all about it. I love it. But I mean, if you're a steak eater, I pity you. And gas prices, I mean, it's ridiculous. So, but yeah, there are proposals about that. I do hope that's one of the things that does change, but it's certainly something that consumers with, hopefully, financial planners and their tax people are really thinking about that. As they plan for retirement and making sure, I mean, what we're all trying to do is make sure we don't run out of money, right? And so that's why, going back to Social Security, it's such a critical decision. It's such a critical decision because that is your annuity for, your
Agreed.
right?
Agreed. I think that government entities frustrate us all. They're not efficient in our view. We look at them, and think, man, they should be better than this. Do you think Social Security as an organization, as the big cruise ship that they are, do you feel that they're getting better, they're listening better, they're adapting better because of this influx of people hitting retirement age? Do you see them being a little bit more pro consumer?
Yes, and no. I think, I mean, I have mad props for, Social Security, and then if you look at their website, they do have incredible information, and they are trying. What I'm seeing, though, is that and this is just my theory, I've seen a lot of misinformation coming out particularly since the pandemic hit. And I think it has a lot to do with many of the Social Security old timers deciding to hang it up. And so what happened is all the field offices closed in March of 2020. They just reopened April 7th, like literally last week, a few days ago. And a lot of these new people were being trained remotely. And so I think that's been a struggle for sure. They've had a change of leadership there. So yeah, I think that it's like any system, it's got some improvements that it can be made for sure.
Their website does seem to be better, from a navigational standpoint. I think, would you agree with that?
Well, I don't know, I'm probably not the best person to ask because I'm the person that has memorized every single spot of where everything was. And every time I do that, they change it. And I'm like, yes. I mean, they simplified the Social Security statement. I'm sure you've seen that, to a 2-pager, that's designed to be sort of by age band. So it pulls information for, the age 50 to 59-year-olds and gives you relevant information about that. And then it's I like that. What I don't like about it is that the earnings history now is a separate, on the My Social Security portal, which is, everyone should have one if they don't. So you've got a 2-page simplified Social Security statement, which quite frankly, before it was like 5 pages and no one read it because it would, they would never read all the caveats, and there were many. But it does now. You have to take another step to get to your earnings history. And I always tell people, make sure your earnings history is accurate. Why is that so important? Well, because your benefit, estimate is based upon your highest 35 years of indexed earnings. So if they're not reported, or they're reported inaccurately, you got a problem. And you don't want to find that out 2 days before you're getting ready to file, when you finally create a My Social Security account. So they need to go into that My Social Security account, and now their earnings history isn't part of that 2-page statement. It is, but it's banded into like 10-year increments early on. So there's a separate section in there for looking at your earnings. So I always say it's like your consumer, your credit report, right? Every year you should be looking at least annually. So I go into my Social Security statement a lot, just because.
And what's that website for people? They probably already know it, but go ahead and give it. Social Security.
Yeah, ssa.gov, G-O-V, like government.
Sure.
And then the very first page is My Social Security. If they
Mhm.
haven't set one up, they need to, because you just gotta take charge of your own retirement. I mean, I talked to someone who literally had looked at his earnings history for, I don't know, a bazillion years, and he had like 12 straight years that nothing was reported. And it becomes abundantly harder to deal with that. And he was approaching retirement too, is when he discovered it. So he had to pull tax return. I mean, it's a mess. So they really need to be looking at that. But there is a lot of good information on Social Security's website. If you go to that same website and just type in publications, in the search bar, there's a lot of good publications that are designed to be, they're consumer facing. So they're, in my mind, I'm always looking for what's easy to understand and read in bite-sized pieces. They have some good information there. They also have some good benefit calculators. That's the other thing about My Social Security. I work with a lot of business owners who say, well, okay, why does it, I've worked my tail off and my Social Security benefit doesn't reflect it. Well, why doesn't it reflect it? Well, because you probably were an S corporation and you only took a small salary, right? And the salary portion was the only portion that was subject to Social Security taxes.
Right.
So now you're like, uh-oh, what do? I need to shift more income to the Social Security taxable category so I can beef up my Social Security benefit. So if you have a My Social Security account, you can go in and do what if scenarios. And then once you've done them all, you say, what if I make this and whatever, and then I retire at this date? It sort of logs all of those what if scenarios, and then you can download it into a report, which I really like. So that works well for somebody who has, is thinking, hey, what does it make a difference if I go back to work? Or what if I, if I'm a business owner and I add more W-2 compensation to the scenario, is that going to, significantly beef up my benefit? That's a good thing. So there's a lot of good information on their website, and that is something that I think they focused on, is consumer awareness, consumer education. So I can't fault them there. I mean, they do have some great information. It's just learning how to navigate the website.
Can people get it all done on the website, or they have to walk in that office?
Yeah, so they want you to do everything through your My Social Security account.
I would think so.
To the point that you can. So, filing for benefits is pretty straightforward. Online. You obviously have to have a My Social Security account, and you go in and go through. It'll ask you all kinds of things. Were you, when did you retire? Are you still working? How much you're earning? Are you married? It's supposed to, in theory, pick up on the fact that your spouse may be entitled to a benefit under your record. That doesn't always happen. Did you have non-covered employment? For example, are you an old civil service retirement system employee? Those folks didn't pay into Social Security, and so they have additional situations that might affect them that would reduce their benefits. But if it's a plain vanilla file, it's very easy to do. I always say, though, in the remarks section, which is in the very last page, always reiterate what you're doing, because then it leaves no risk. You've done it twice. You've said, okay, during the process of going through the application, you've put what you want, and then in the remarks, reiterate it always, because it protects them. That's their protected filing, to say, okay, this is what I wanted. The protected filing date is the date that they submit that application. And if they say, well, but I asked for 6 months of retroactive benefits because I'm now 68 years old, and I know I can get as much as 6 months of retroactive benefits if I'm beyond full retirement age by at least that much. I put it in my remarks, you didn't do it, so then it's there. So I always say, hey, reiterate what you're trying to do, always in remarks. And if there's any room for interpretation, they can call you about it.
What other hacks? That's a hack, in my opinion. I like that. What other little tidbits like that? Little hopeful Heather hints. How about that?
I mean, the other thing is, if you're in a situation where you think you'll be entitled to, well, let me go back to say what you can't do online is survivor. You can't file for survivor benefits online, okay? So the only way a surviving spouse is going to automatically collect a survivor's benefit is if they were collecting dependent spousal benefits while their spouse was living. That's the only time.
Mhm.
Otherwise, that is a file that cannot be done online. Now, during COVID, people had to call and make a phone appointment, and it was a hot mess and a nightmare trying to get through, but that was
Oh,
really the way
yeah.
to do it. But I would say another hack would be, and I discovered these things actually through working with my mom. When I was helping her file, she was one of those lucky people that was born in time to file what's called a restricted application. What the heck is that? That means that's one of the strategies that's sort of grandfathering out here within the next year, but she was born before January 2nd, 1954. And people born before that have the ability to, instead of filing for their own retirement benefit, they could say, hey, I want to file for half of his or hers, my spouse or ex-spouse, and hold off on getting my own. So that's what she did. She was married to my dad for 10 years. They were divorced. And she was able to do that until she turned 70. And she turned 70 in September of last year, and she got her maximized Social Security benefit. What I discovered in that process with her is she had been married a second time, but she wasn't married for 10 years. So you have to be married for at least 10 years to be able to consider a former spouse's benefits with your own. She had to give the marriage certificate and the divorce decree for her marriage to my dad. What I didn't know, because you find these things out when you're going through it real, is that even though the second marriage ended in divorce and didn't even count because she wasn't married for 10 years, they still wanted that information. So I'd say another hack would be gather more information than you think you need, because anytime you're dealing with particularly former spousal benefits, they're going to require a marriage certificate and a divorce decree for every marriage you've had, if it's more than one. So that's one thing. And with survivor benefits, people always ask, I think the benefit under my former spouse might be higher than mine, but I don't want to ask them. You don't have to, but you do have to supply that information. You have to have the divorce decree, the marriage certificate, so that they will give you the information. The ex-spouse doesn't have to know. They will get a notice saying, hey, somebody, a dependent, is collecting benefits on your record. I got that call from my dad. He was like, what do you mean your mom's getting something from me? Like, pipe down, Dad, it's not going to affect you. And she deserves it. So, but, so I do get that question from people. Like, I really don't want to reach out to my ex, but I think that I might be entitled to a higher benefit over that. And you just have to give them the paperwork so that you can prove that you did indeed have that marriage, that you're now divorced, measuring the time of marriage and all of that. So that's it.
All right. As you were saying that, my brain, of course, is going 100 miles an hour. I'm thinking of the sociopathic spouse that marries 4 times, 10 years apiece, and then she gets, or he gets, whatever the strategy is, benefits from all 4?
No, but there can be cherry picking going on. There can be cherry picking. So let's do it.
You're like, Stan, what are you talking about? But that's
Trust me.
just...
It's when I get to talk at consumer events, we all have a chuckle about this, because we're seeing this more and more. People getting married, divorced, married, divorced.
Right.
Well, we have to say, how many times were you married? Okay, 4 times. How many times in a stint? 10 years each time? Awesome. Now we get to cherry pick benefits. Okay. We don't get all of them, but we can look at all 4 of those spouses and compare it to your own retirement benefit and say, okay, if one of them, of the 4, whichever one's got the highest, if it's more than your own retirement benefit, that person is who we're going to cherry pick. We're going to say, we want that one, right? So it happens. This is probably part of why the trust funds are having issues. And so let's suppose that, you're, as a former spouse, he's got 2 former spouses at 10 years a pop. Theoretically, both of them could be collecting an ex-spousal benefit from him in addition to his current spouse. So
there's got to be some great stories out there like that.
There's got to be. And it doesn't affect his benefit. It doesn't affect his benefit. So there you have it.
Weird retirement strategy of the day from Heather and Stan.
Right? Well, and then I always get a chuckle, because then I always say, and the ex-spouse is worth more dead than alive. And they're like, wait a minute, let me perk up for that. And I'm like, because during lifetime, a spousal or ex-spousal, it doesn't matter, the same maximum benefit, it's that you can collect either the higher of your own retirement benefit if you've earned one, or 50% of that spouse or ex-spouse's primary insurance amount. Remember, primary insurance amount is the amount they get at full retirement age.
Mm-hmm.
That's the maximum. Now, if I, as the former spouse, say, okay, I have a really small negligible retirement benefit of my own, so I know that that 50% is going to be higher. I'm only going to get the full 50% if I wait until my full retirement age to collect it. Of course, if I collect it early, like if I collect my own retirement benefit early, it's reduced. But enter survivor world, and now we're dealing with, we're not capped at 50% of the primary insurance amount of that spouse. Now we're dealing with 100% of what they were collecting or entitled to collect at their death, right? So that's why, going back to our original conversation about married couples, you need to be thinking about that, what that higher wage earner does in terms of claiming age affects the surviving spouse. Because if that higher earning spouse filed at 62, 63 or something like that, that's their base amount. That's the 100% that we're starting with, versus if they had waited until full retirement age, that's obviously a higher base amount that we're starting with. So yeah, I always say, spouse, you have to ask, when you're dealing with consumers, you say, how many times, were you married before? Oh yeah, 4 times. How many years? Okay, this one counts, this one counts. Are they dead or alive? Because,
the answer they're like, what do you need them to be? No, I'm kidding.
No, right?
Yeah, what's in my best interest?
I'm a big Dateline mystery girl. I just
exactly.
It's bad. And I'm like, I always ask my husband, hey, can you get my notepad over there?
Social Security murder.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. So,
we've gone down the rabbit hole. This is the fun part that I think that because I'm assuming that I had some listeners out there going, but what if? Well, there's your what if. I do have a question also about the offices walking in. Now, obviously, before you go into the Social Security office, you take the CBD pill or oil to calm down, right? We're not promoting alcohol consumption or anything like that, but CBD, non-addictive, but it does calm you down. So you walk in the door. Tell me the advice from there, because I know people say, well, I never want to go in there. I mean, I hear that from my clients and my people that call me. What do you tell people? How do you circumvent the office and maximize your visit?
Well, you go in there already knowing what you know, because not doing that and then trying to explain to somebody, and again, there are amazing Social Security representatives. Now I think it's going to be a pain point for sure, because they're opening the offices, and like I keep getting ones I'm in Georgia. I keep getting texts because I'm on every text chain, the office in this county is open from this time to this time, and they're kind of a little bit disjointed right now. They really need to have an appointment. You can come in there and wait, but you really need like a double dose of CBD if you do that. But what I would say is, before you even go in there, write down, be prepared, write down exactly what you want to do, have you researched it, having the documents you need. You don't want to have to make more than one trip. So if you're going in there looking for a widow or widower's benefit, make sure you go in there with your marriage certificate. If it's an ex-spouse that's deceased, the divorce decree. Typically you don't need the death certificate because the funeral home will have sent it. But if you have one, take it. You just want to have the documents that you need. So that's why it's so important when you're going for a particular type of benefit, read up on it. Go to the SSA's website and go to publications. There is a publication for every single thing. If you are the survivor, if, family benefits for children, or, whatever the case may be, read up and be educated before you go in, because I have seen cases where someone is told inaccurate information when they go in. So you want to go in there, take responsibility for your own, take charge of your own retirement, right? You don't want to go in there and just take it as gospel, because sometimes it's not accurate. And I see it more often than I'd like. People say, well, they told me that I couldn't even file because I earned too much money this year and I need to come back next year. And I said, the annual earnings test, it was a misinterpretation that someone who, I kind of mentioned it briefly. If you want to file for benefits before full retirement age and you make more than $19,560 this year, if you're under full retirement age the whole year, Social Security can say, have a nice day, come back later, except for if someone retires mid-year and says, well, wait a minute, I made $50,000 from January to this moment, but I'm retiring for the rest of the year, then they fall under a special rule that says, okay, we'll disregard the prior earnings so long as you don't earn more than the monthly equivalent of that annual limit for the rest of the year. So these are the kinds of things that when you're going in there and saying, okay, this is what I want to do. Write down all your questions, take the documents that you need, read the publications that apply to your situation, and know what you know. Because you don't want to spend another 8 hours in there because you think you got poor advice.
Yeah, be prepared and make it easy on that receiving person. You know, Heather, everything is a Patrick Swayze Roadhouse movie correlation, as you know.
Oh my gosh, my husband's favorite. I can't believe you just said that.
Exactly. So I'm going to give you the Patrick Swayze Roadhouse correlation for walking into the Social Security office. And if you haven't watched the movie, you know, once you finish the podcast, just take the day off and go watch it. It's a classic.
Well, come to my house because it's on every day.
Exactly. So Patrick Swayze, when he goes to the hospital, he brings his medical records with him to make it easy for the doctor, if you remember that as well. And the other thing that he said to his bouncers as he's training them for the upcoming night is be nice. Well, what if they do this? Doesn't matter. Be nice. Well, what if the Social Security person yells at me and calls me a name? Be nice. So once again, Heather, just as a haunting thing to you, Patrick Swayze is back in your life in this podcast. Isn't that fantastic? So you got to tell your husband that this guy did a Social Security Roadhouse correlation and it made total sense.
Well, I love Patrick Swayze, but every time I see the movie on, I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. How many times can we watch it?
There's life meanings in that. And we just pulled a Social Security correlation from Roadhouse, which I think you probably never thought was possible, but now I've put that in your brain, and you're going to use that in all of your presentations, I'm assuming.
Yeah, you can have me for life if it had been a Golden Girls reference, because that is my favorite show. But I'm sure there is one.
A couple more questions. What the next meeting for our friends, the Social Security Board, when they walk in and they have the croissants and everything there in the office and the big marble table, when is that? That's coming up, correct?
Well, the trust fund comes out the report comes out in October. So this is, I was just reading as I was waiting for us to chat today, the Congressional Business Office, I was reading through the pages of, the potential of things that'll be on the agenda, what they're talking about, what they could be doing to shore up this issue. And of course, the increase in payroll tax and all of those things are on the docket. So, they can't continue to ignore it. So yeah, they're in discussions and they need to do something.
Are they flying you in for that, Heather, in the Learjet?
Oh gosh, I'm a nerd. I would love to just sit there and be a fly on the wall. I really would.
They need you there because they need people that actually deal with it on a day-to-day basis with actual humans. But we would love to have you back on after the grand poobahs and the grand poobah-ettes of Social Security sit down and pontificate. We'd love to have your analysis of what they actually said or did and what you think is coming up. So I'm pigeonholing you back in the fall, hopefully, to talk about it.
Talk about it for hours. I love it. I love, I just am just such a advocate for consumers. I just think that we really have to take charge of our own situations. And the sooner we can do that, I always say people say, when should I start planning about Social Security or planning retirement? And I'm like, now. How old you are, do it now. The best advice I give my much younger sisters is, have you met the Roth IRA or the Roth election, the 401k? If you haven't, go run and do it. Because taxes, that could be a whole nother conversation. Taxes, is such a huge risk in retirement. It also can impact Social Security benefits. And so just, preemptively starting to think about your own retirement long before you get to the age at which you're making that claim decision is just so important. Because, we work so hard. Who wants to do retirement and be terrified?
Right.
So I just say, be your own advocate. Read from reputable sources,
Agreed. So here, we're to the final question. It's been a ton of fun. If you're out there going, Heather Schreiber, that name sounds familiar. You've heard her, you've seen her quoted in USA Today and Forbes and Market Watch and all these places. She's kind of the go-to place. We were very excited when she agreed to be on Fun with Annuities, even though we barely talk about annuities. But today we were, which was Social Security, the best inflation annuity on the planet. But here's the last question. I never tell my celebrity guest host what it's going to be. I want to surprise them because I want them to be on their feet
Oh boy. Okay.
and react. So here it is. Mic drop moment, Heather Schreiber. Words of wisdom as we head out to the rest of the week. What are your words of wisdom to people? And then you drop the mic from there.
Words of wisdom. Well, I think I kind of already said it. I just feel like no one's going to take care of us. I mean, we've got to take care of ourselves. We have to, it's tough. It's tough in this environment, this market, and taxes and all the things that are just threats to having, the retirement we want. And so I just am such an advocate of, being in the driver's seat of that, really reading, educating yourself, and knowing what and not relying on, well, they said, just equip yourself, with the knowledge that you need, with the partners that you need to make sure that you get, you're sitting in the driver's seat in retirement instead of being fearful, because nobody wants that. Nobody wants that.
That was a legitimately phenomenal mic drop moment. And that person that just said that is Heather Schreiber. I think she's kind of my long lost sister from Georgia that I didn't know that I had, because we just kind of twang and talk about geeky things about finance, but it's good. It's good. But I appreciate you being on, and I appreciate every single one of you out there listening to us on the podcast platforms and viewing this on my Fun with Annuities YouTube channel. And I will see you next week. Thanks for listening to Fun with Annuities. Please hit the subscribe button and make sure to go to my site at theannuityman.com, where you can run your own SPIA, DIA, and QLAC quotes and see a live feed of the best MIGA fixed rates in the country, and even get indexed and income rider quotes as well. You can also sign up for my 6 annuity owner's manual books, and I'll ship them for free and under no obligation. I also encourage you to schedule a one-on-one call with me, Stan the Annuity Man, so we can have a full discussion of your specific situation. It will be the best brutally factual and truthful advice you will ever get, and that's one guarantee you should definitely take advantage of. So join me next time for the #1 annuity podcast on the planet, Fun with Annuities.